When I first moved into the quiet countryside, I was looking for exactly one thing: peace. After 15 years of working in a loud, crowded city, I was exhausted. I wanted a place where the morning started with birds singing instead of car horns, and where the evenings were calm enough that you could hear the wind moving through the trees. That's why the small house by the lake caught my attention. It wasn't a huge house. In fact, it was pretty modest. 2 bedrooms, a small wooden porch, and a big backyard that sloped gently toward the water. But the view, absolutely perfect. The lake stretched wide and calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. And best of all, the realtor explained something interesting. The lake itself, she said, pointing to the map, is actually privately owned land. The previous owner owned both the house and the lake area. I raised an eyebrow. So the lake comes with the property. She smiled. Well, technically, yes. That sealed the deal for me. Within 3 weeks, the paperwork was done, and I became the new owner of the house and the small lake behind it. At first, everything seemed perfect. The first morning I woke up there, I made coffee, stepped onto the porch, and watched the mist rising slowly from the water. Ducks floated across the surface. The air smelled fresh and clean. It felt like paradise. Then I met my neighbor. Her name was Linda, but in my mind, she quickly became something else.
Karen.
I first noticed her 2 days after moving in. I was standing near the edge of the lake, tossing small pieces of bread to the ducks when I heard someone shouting, "Hey!" I turned around. A woman in her late 50s was marching across the grass from the neighboring property. She had short blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of angry expression that suggested she had been mad long before she arrived. She stopped about 10 feet away from me and crossed her arms. "What do you think you're doing?" I blinked. Feeding the ducks." She looked at me like I had just insulted her. "You can't do that." I frowned slightly. "Why not?" "Because this is a private lake." I almost laughed. "Well, yeah," I said calmly. "I know." She pointed dramatically at the water. "My family has been using this lake for 20 years. That's nice. So, you need to stop." I stared at her for a moment. Then I said something that would start a war. "I actually own the lake now." Her sunglasses slowly slid down her nose. "You what?" "I bought the property last month. The lake is included in the land deed." For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she exploded. "That's ridiculous." Her voice echoed across the water, startling the ducks. "You can't just own the lake. My kids grew up swimming here. My husband fishes here every weekend." I shrugged slightly. "Well, technically, it's my property." Her face turned red. "You're lying." I pulled out my phone and opened the property map the realtor had sent me. "Nope. It's right here." I showed her the screen. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she pointed a finger directly at my chest. "You listen to me," she snapped. "We have always used this lake, and we're not going to stop just because some city guy moved in."
City guy.
That made me chuckle a little. "I'm not saying you can't enjoy the view," I said calmly. "But if you want to use the lake, you should probably ask first." Her mouth fell open. "Ask."
Yeah.
She stared at me like I had just suggested. She bowed down and kissed my shoes. Then she turned and stormed back toward her house, muttering loudly, "This isn't over." I watched her go, already sensing this would not be the last time we spoke. I was right. 3 days later, things escalated. It was a Saturday morning, and I was inside assembling a new grill when I heard loud splashing outside. At first, I thought maybe ducks had landed, but the noise was too big. I walked to the window and froze. There were 3 kids swimming in the lake, and 2 adults sitting on the shore with fishing rods. Linda's family. I sighed. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part of me knew that if I didn't say something now, this would become the norm. So I walked outside. As soon as Linda saw me approaching, she smiled smugly. "Oh, look," she said loudly to her husband. "The lake owner is here." Her husband chuckled. "Morning, neighbor." I crossed my arms. "Morning." Then I pointed at the water. "You guys know this is private property, right?" Linda waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, relax. We're not hurting anything." That's not the point. Her husband shrugged. We've always used this lake. I took a slow breath. I understand that. But things changed when the property was sold. Linda rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Then she said the sentence that sealed her fate. You can't stop us. There was something about the way she said it. So confident. So entitled. It made me smile. Okay, I said. She frowned. Okay.
Yeah.
If that's how you feel. I turned and walked back toward my house. Behind me, I heard her whisper to her husband.
See.
I told you he'd back down. But I wasn't backing down. Not even close. Because that afternoon, I made a phone call. And by Monday morning, a survey team arrived. Bright orange flags started appearing all around the property line. Linda noticed immediately. She marched across the yard again. What is this? I smiled. Property survey. Why? Because I'm planning something. Her eyes narrowed.
What?
I pointed to one of the orange markers. Well, according to the official boundary line, I paused. Then I said the words that would trigger the biggest meltdown I'd ever seen. I'm building a fence. Her face went completely pale. You can't do that. Oh, I can. It'll block our access to the lake. I tilted my head. Exactly. She stared at me in horror. You wouldn't dare. I smiled again. 6 feet tall. And then I delivered the final blow. Right down the property line. She turned bright red. You're cutting our yard in half. Technically, I said calmly. I'm protecting my property. She began shouting so loudly that 2 workers from the survey team turned to watch. You're insane. I'm calling the city. I'm calling a lawyer. I shrugged. Go ahead. Then I walked back inside. But the real drama, that hadn't even started yet. Because when the fence builders showed up 3 days later, Linda completely lost her mind. 3 days later, the fence builders arrived. I was drinking coffee on my porch when a large pickup truck rolled into my driveway. Behind it was a trailer loaded with wooden panels, metal posts, and bags of concrete. 2 workers stepped out, stretching their arms and looking around the property. One of them waved at me. You the homeowner? That's me, I said, walking down the porch steps. He pulled out a clipboard and pointed toward the orange survey flags that had been planted earlier in the week. We'll follow the property line exactly where those markers are. Perfect, I said. But before the workers could even unload their equipment, I heard a familiar voice echo across the yard. What do you think you're doing? Linda. She came storming across the grass again, moving faster than I had ever seen someone her age move. Her sunglasses were pushed up on her head, and her face was already bright red. The workers exchanged looks. One of them whispered quietly, Oh. Linda stopped directly in front of the truck and planted her hands on her hips. You can't park that here. The worker blinked. Ma'am, this is his driveway. She ignored him and pointed at the trailer. You're not building a fence here. The second worker scratched his beard. Well, that's kind of our job. She spun around and pointed directly at me. Tell them to leave. I leaned against the porch railing.
No.
Her mouth fell open.
What do you mean, no?
I mean they're building the fence. You can't do that. Actually, I can. The first worker quietly started unloading tools while Linda continued yelling. I already told you. This lake belongs to the whole neighborhood. I shook my head. Nope. It belongs to me. She turned to the workers again. You better stop right now before I call the police. The 2 workers paused and looked at me. I shrugged. Go ahead, I said calmly. Linda stared at me like she expected fear. Instead, I walked back to my porch and sat down with my coffee. That seemed to make her even angrier. Fine, she shouted. I will. She stormed back to her house while muttering loudly. The workers started laughing. Is she always like this? One asked. Pretty much. Well, the other guy said, picking up a post driver. This should be an interesting day. He wasn't wrong. About 20 minutes later, a police car slowly pulled up near the road. Linda stood in her driveway, pointing dramatically toward my yard like she had just discovered a crime scene. The officer stepped out of the car and walked over. He looked at the workers, then at the fence posts. then at me. What seems to be the problem? Linda jumped in immediately. Officer, these men are illegally building a fence and blocking access to the lake. The officer turned to me. Is this your property? Yes, sir. Do you have a survey confirming the boundary? I handed him the paperwork the survey team had given me earlier that week. He studied it for a moment. Then he nodded. Everything matched perfectly. He turned back to Linda. Ma'am, the property line is correct. He's allowed to build a fence here. Her face twisted in disbelief. But we've used that lake for 20 years. I understand, the officer said calmly, but that doesn't make it public property. She looked like she might explode. So, you're just going to let him do this? The officer shrugged slightly. Yes. For a moment, Linda didn't move. Then she let out a loud, dramatic sigh. This is harassment. No, ma'am, the officer replied. This is a fence. The workers tried not to laugh. Linda stomped her foot like an angry child. You'll regret this, she shouted at me. I lifted my coffee mug. Have a nice day. The officer gave me a small nod before returning to his car. Linda stood there for another 30 seconds, fuming. Then she stormed back inside her house and slammed the door so hard that one of the workers jumped. Well, the bearded guy said, that was fun. Then they got back to work. The construction took 2 days. And Linda watched every single minute of it. Sometimes she stood in her yard with binoculars. Other times, she sat in a lawn chair facing the fence like she was guarding the border. At one point, she even brought out a measuring tape and started yelling about how the fence was 3 inches too far on her side. The workers checked. It wasn't. By the end of the second day, the fence stood tall and solid, 6 feet high, a long wooden wall running exactly along the property line. And yes, it completely blocked Linda's direct access to the lake. Her yard had originally extended all the way to the water's edge. But because the true boundary line cut diagonally across her property, the fence now split off a large triangular section. On my side of the fence, which technically meant part of what she had always thought was her backyard now belonged to me. When the final panel was installed, the workers packed up their tools. One of them patted the fence. That thing's not going anywhere. Good, I said. As their truck drove away, I noticed Linda standing by her window, staring at the fence like it had personally insulted her. Things stayed quiet for about a week. Then the revenge attempt started. First, it was the music. One evening around 9 p.m., Linda rolled a large speaker onto her patio and blasted loud country music directly toward my house. I could hear it clearly from inside. At first, I ignored it. But when it was still going at midnight, I checked the local noise ordinance. Turns out, quiet hours started at 10 p.m. So I called the non-emergency police number. 15 minutes later, an officer knocked on Linda's door. The music stopped almost immediately. The next day, she glared at me over the fence. You're unbelievable, she snapped. I smiled. Sleep well. She stormed away again. But she still wasn't done. A few days later, I came home from the grocery store and found something strange. There were tree branches piled up along the fence line. On my side, I looked over the fence. Linda was trimming a large bush and tossing the branches over like she was feeding a bonfire. I cleared my throat. You know that's my property, right? She didn't even look at me. I'm trimming my plants. Yeah, but you're throwing the branches onto my land. She shrugged. Deal with it. I stared at the pile for a moment. Then I smiled. Okay. That evening, I gathered every single branch and carefully tossed them back over the fence, right onto her patio furniture. The next morning, she came outside and screamed so loudly that a flock of birds flew out of the trees. The fence war had officially begun. But what Linda didn't realize was that she was about to make a mistake so big, it would end the entire conflict. And it would cost her a lot more than a lake view. For about 2 weeks after the branch incident, things stayed relatively quiet. Linda still glared at me whenever she saw me outside, but she stopped throwing things over the fence. The music stopped too. For a brief moment, I thought maybe the situation had finally cooled down. I was wrong. The real problem started on a Saturday morning. I woke up around 7 a.m. and walked outside with my coffee, like usual. The lake was calm, The air was cool, and everything felt peaceful. But as I walked toward the fence, something immediately caught my eye. There was a ladder leaning against it, my ladder. And on top of the fence, straddling the wooden panels, like some kind of angry gargoyle, was Linda. She was wearing gardening gloves and holding a pair of bolt cutters. For a few seconds, my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Then I shouted, "Hey!" She jumped slightly, but didn't climb down. Instead, she glared at me. "You built this stupid fence." "Yes." "You ruined our yard." "No. The survey ruined your yard." She pointed the bolt cutters toward the fence dramatically. "I'm fixing the problem." I walked closer. "You're cutting my fence." "Yes." I crossed my arms. "That's destruction of property," she scoffed. "Oh, please." Then she lifted the bolt cutters and tried to clamp them around one of the metal brackets holding the panels together. The problem? The brackets were thick steel. The bolt cutters barely made a dent. She grunted with effort, trying again.
Still nothing.
I leaned casually against the fence. "You might want stronger tools." Her face turned red. "This fence is illegal anyway." "Nope. You stole part of our yard." "Nope. You're a terrible neighbor." "That one might be true." "That did it." She threw the bolt cutters down onto the grass and climbed down the ladder. "You think this is funny?" "A little." She pointed at me again. "I'm calling the homeowners association." I raised an eyebrow. "There is no HOA." Her expression froze.
"What?"
"There's no homeowners association here." "That's impossible." "Nope. Borough County area. No HOA rules." She stood there silently for a few seconds, clearly trying to come up with another threat. Finally, she said, "Then I'll call a lawyer." "Go ahead." And she actually did. About a week later, I received a letter in the mail from a local law office. It claimed the fence was built unfairly and demanded I remove it. But the moment I read the details, I almost laughed. Because the letter didn't dispute the survey. It didn't dispute the property lines. It just argued that the fence was unfriendly. So I sent the lawyer a copy of the official property survey and building permit. 2 days later, I got another letter. This one was much shorter. Basically, the case had no legal standing, which meant Linda had just paid a lawyer to tell her she was wrong. After that, she stopped talking to me completely. For about a month. And honestly, it was wonderful. The fence gave me privacy, the lake was peaceful again, and the ducks had returned. Even bought a small kayak and started paddling around the lake in the evenings. Sometimes I could see Linda standing at the fence watching silently. She looked like someone who had lost a very long argument. But then, she made her biggest mistake. One night around 11 p.m., I heard a loud splash outside. At first, I thought something had fallen into the lake. Then I heard voices. Kids' voices. I grabbed a flashlight and walked down toward the water. And what I saw made me stop in my tracks. 2 teenagers were climbing over the fence. And behind them was Linda. She had moved the ladder again. The kids jumped into the lake and started swimming. Linda stood there smiling proudly. "See," she said when she noticed me. "We're using the lake again." I sighed. "You broke onto my property." "Oh, relax."
"No."
I pulled out my phone.
"What are you doing?" she asked.
"Calling the police." Her smile disappeared. "You wouldn't." I already had the number dialed.
"Yes."
I would. 20 minutes later, the same police officer from before showed up. He looked exhausted the moment he saw Linda. "Ma'am," again. Linda started talking rapidly. "He's harassing us. This lake should be public." The officer held up a hand. "Did you climb over his fence?" "Well, did you enter his property?" "We just wanted to swim." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, that's trespassing." Her face turned pale. "Trespassing." "Yes." The teenagers climbed out of the water quietly and stood awkwardly nearby. The officer looked at me. "Do you want to press charges?" Linda's jaw dropped. "You wouldn't dare." I paused. Then I said something simple. "I just want them to leave and stop coming onto my property." The officer nodded. He turned back to Linda. "You are officially being warned for trespassing. If it happens again, you can be fined or charged." Linda looked like she might faint. For the first time since I moved in, she had no response. She just grabbed the ladder and stormed back toward her house with the teenagers following behind. And that night, something finally changed. Because after that warning, Linda never crossed the fence again. But the story still had one final twist. About 3 months later, a for sale sign appeared in Linda's yard. I noticed it while walking down to the lake one morning. At first, I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. But nope. There it was. Bright red and white. For sale. Apparently, the fence war had taken its toll. Over the next few weeks, several people came to look at the house. Every time a potential buyer walked through the backyard, I could see them stop and stare at the massive fence line. One day, a couple even knocked on my door. "Hi," the man said politely. "We're thinking about buying the house next door." I nodded. "Nice place." He pointed toward the fence. "So, what's the story there?" I smiled slightly. "Property lines."
He laughed.
"Fair enough." A month later, the house sold. And Linda moved away. The day the moving truck left, she didn't even look in my direction.
No yelling. No dramatic speeches.
Just silence. And honestly, that was the best part. A week later, the new neighbors moved in. A young couple with a golden retriever. The first thing they did was walk over to introduce themselves. "Hi," the woman said cheerfully. "We're Mark and Jenna." "Nice to meet you." They glanced at the lake. "It's beautiful," Mark said. "Do you mind if we walk down and look at it sometimes?" I smiled. "Of course not." "Really? Just don't climb the fence." They laughed.
Deal.
And just like that, peace finally returned to the lake.
No screaming.
No police visits.
No ladders.
Just quiet mornings, calm water, and ducks drifting across the surface again. Sometimes I sit on the porch and look at the fence. Most people would see it as a barrier. But to me, it's the reason the lake is peaceful again. And if there's one thing I learned from the whole experience, it's this. Good fences don't just make good neighbors. Sometimes,